All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Birds of the Biosphere. My name is Delana Arnold. I'm the Education Programs Manager for the Georgian Bay Biosphere. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are going to jump right in as it's 11 o'clock. At this point in 2020, I imagine most of us have participated in a Zoom webinar before, but just in case you haven't, I want to point out two features. If you're joining us on a desktop or a laptop, you'll see at the bottom, if you wiggle your mouse, there's some options. So we are going to be using the Q&A tool. If you have a question for the presenters at any point in the webinar, I ask that you please type it into the Q&A to submit it. The other thing we have set up today are a few polls, little voting tools. So I'm going to show you what those look like right now. Everyone who's joined us so far, where are you joining us from? What municipality is your seasonal or permanent residence in? Just want to get a sense of who's tuning in today. Give it a couple more seconds. All right, most of us, like 2 more seconds. Okay, awesome. Most of us have answered the poll. So what's cool about these is I can share with you the results. So in and around the Georgian Bay Biosphere, these are the municipalities. So we have lots of people joining us from those. But then 50% of you are from somewhere else. So that's pretty neat. Welcome. All right, what else? So those are our polls and our Q&A. I just want to make a note too, we are recording today's session, so I will be uploading it to our YouTube channel afterwards, and we're going to send out a follow-up email with all the resources and things that we're talking about today. It will also include a link to the video, so you can watch it again and again and again. Now, as we wait for a couple more people to join us, I'd like to share a little about the Georgian Bay Biosphere. So we are one of 18 UNESCO World Biospheres in Canada. Our region is ecologically unique with the largest freshwater archipelago on Earth. This biosphere stretches 200 kilometers from the Severn River in the south to the French River in the north, and it was designated in 2004. So we are a registered charity with an office in Parry Sound, and we rely on grants, partnerships, and donations to do our conservation and education work. Since 2014, the Township of the Archipelago has held an active partnership with the Georgian Bay Biosphere to provide environmental programming to ratepayers. So this has included a range of things from water quality monitoring, coordination, to forest health work, guided hikes, kids programming, and in 2020, it includes webinars. So we'd also like to acknowledge the land before we begin. The Georgian Bay Biosphere is situated within the treaty territories of Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and the Williams Treaty of 1920 and located on Anishinaabeg territory. Our organization under UNESCO acknowledges the rights of Indigenous people in this territory and works towards respectful and reciprocal relationships as we are all caretakers of the land. So I will now turn things over to our two presenters, Tianna Burke, who is conservation biologist with the Georgian Bay Biosphere, and Kenton Otterbein, who is the Discovery Program Leader at Killbear Provincial Park.
Trying to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. So as Delana said, I'm Tianna. Just a little bit about myself so you know kind of where I'm coming from is I began my environmental career with a Bachelor's of Environmental Studies at the University of Waterloo. Here I studied restoration ecology, so I wasn't quite into birds just yet. I then did my Master's of Science at Trent, where I studied the life of bank swallows. And I looked at how their reproduction varies based on what type of habitat that they breed in. And after this, I came over to Parry Sound and started working for the Georgian Bay Biosphere, where now I'm the conservation biologist researching and conducting outreach on birds, bats, snakes, turtles, you name it. Unlike a lot of people, I got into birding a little later in life. I've always loved birds and remember feeding chickadees with my grandparents at their cottage. But I didn't begin kind of leisurely birding until I worked for the Canadian Wildlife Service, right in between my undergrad and master's degree. I started doing goose banding, and I would go for lunchtime walks with some of my coworkers. And there was one in particular who I remember could name everything. And so I started jotting down at lunch all the different types of birds that he was talking about. And I would look them up later. And I had no idea that there were so many different types of birds. They were all so cool. They all looked amazing. And then I began volunteering for the Toronto bird banding, Tommy Thompson Park bird banding lab. And as soon as I held my first bird at the station and started talking about birds, I was basically hooked, and I haven't looked back since. So now I'll hand it over to Kenton to introduce himself.
Hello, yes. So I went to Trent University also, honors Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Resource Management. But I ended up working for Ontario Parks. I've been the head naturalist here at Killbear for 21 years and was at Charleston Lake before that as a naturalist. And I also came to birding late. It was when I started teaching outdoor education to school groups, and I remember being out with an expert birder that was actually leading the guided hike, and I was just walking along with all the other school children, and there was all this bird song in the forest, which was all over my head. Basically, I didn't understand any of the birds or recognize any of the calls, and he heard this very distinctive chick purr, which was the call of this scarlet tanager that you see right here. And so he pointed this out, and I thought he was a magician. I had never seen a bird this colorful before. I didn't know they existed in Ontario. And it was from that really that I got interested in birds, and I'm nowhere near as advanced as Tianna. I'm much more, I'm not an expert, but I'm definitely not a novice either. But the nice thing about birding is that you can be at whatever level that you want to be, and it's something that you can do a lifelong learning. If you want to become the person that knows every twitter in the woods, you can do that. My brain's not quite musical enough to do every twitter in the woods, but I have a fair number of calls that I'm able to get. But yeah, that's good for the first slide there. So the getting started, the best thing to do is really to find some buddies that you can go out with and bird. And if they are people that are already advanced birders or know more than you, then you can brain suck off of them. But if they're just someone else that are like you that are at a beginning level and just want to start learning, it's a great way to go out, be social with somebody else, and the practice of learning with somebody else, like you will you'll it just works really well as a social enterprise, basically working with another person. And of course, you're going to want to get some things like bird books. I think Tianna might happen to have one or two that she can show you.
I do. I brought with me the one that I use most is the Peterson field guide, but I also brought with me some more advanced guides. Like as I started wanting to learn more and be more detailed, I have one that's called Hawks at a Distance, which shows you hawks flying in the air so you can see what they look like in different flight patterns. Bird feathers, for if you just find a bird feather on the ground and you want to know what it is. Bird songs, talks about all the different bird songs and actually puts them in little pictures that you can take a look at. And one of my favorites, if you get into warblers and the world of warblers, is the Warbler Guide. It's a really fantastic book.
Okay. Thank you. And then there's also, of course, apps, and a lot of people now download them onto their phone, And so the one I like is Merlin Bird ID. And the beauty, there's lots of other types too, but the beauty about these ones is that you can have the calls right on your phone. And so when you're out there and you hear a call and you think that you know what it is, you can go to your phone, bring up that bird, and play that call and hear it, and then listen to the bird in real time and be able to match it up. And that's way better than in the old days when you would have to try and remember the bird and then go back to your tape recorder or your CD player that back in the 80s and 90s that was the way that you accessed the bird calls. So these and iNaturalist is another one too. The next thing we will talk about is getting to know your backyard birds, because in the bird book or the apps, there's hundreds of birds, but you don't need to know all of them. You only need to know the ones that are where you are. So finding out a checklist for a local area is really good. So most provincial parks have a checklist of the birds in their area. And by spring, summer, winter, or fall, the migrants going through, or which ones are the residents. And that way it kind of winnows down the number of birds that you need to know. The other thing is in the Merlin app, what it has is a setting where you can look at most likely birds in your area on that day. And so it changes, especially during the migration season. And that really helps you. So you don't have to learn 45 warblers, you just have to know the 10 warblers that happen to be going through on that date in early May, say, or later on, there'd be a few more warblers that would be coming through. And then the next thing that we'll talk about is your optics. And your ears are likely surprisingly going to be the thing that you're going to use the most when it comes to birding, but everyone always starts with the binoculars, and they're great. You want to use those too, and then you can also use a spotting scope too. But the binoculars are there's all kinds of different types. But just a real quick guide for you. The numbers, you can get like a 10 by 42 or an 8 by 42. And what those numbers mean, the first number is the magnification, and the second number is the diameter of the objective lens. And what it basically does is the larger the number, the more light it lets in, and so the more light you'll see when you're looking through through your binoculars. And it also affects your field of view. And so, as an example, Tianna has on the slide here the 10 times and the 8 times. And so the 10 times means it's a 10 times magnification, so you're a little bit closer to the bird, or the bird appears closer to you, but you don't see quite as big of an area. And so some people really like that high level of magnification. You can get even 12 times some binoculars. But for every time you're a bit closer, that number is a bit higher in magnification, you get a more restricted field of view. And so if your hands are a little bit shaky, it might be harder to see the bird. Or if it's a bird that's flitting around a lot, then maybe you don't want to be quite that close in. You want to back off a little bit. So an 8 by 42 is often kind of a good starter binoculars. And I think, Tianna, Vector is one of your favorite makes that has a really good warranty and such.
It is. I working in gravel pits for 3 years, I used that warranty a lot. Yeah, they do a great job and they have great customer service. So
okay.
Yeah.
I think that might be me, and over to you, Tianna.
Yes, so now we're going to talk a little bit about gathering clues to figure out what types of birds you're seeing, especially before you actually see any. So the thing that I've learned over the years, especially with me, is that we sometimes make things more complicated than they need to be. I get really excited when I'm out and I try to frantically try and ID everything that I possibly can. And by the time I calm down enough to go look at a bird, it's already gone. So it's important to calm down, choose one bird to look at a time, and make sure to take notes about it. So for those of you who might get a little overwhelmed like I do with excitement, remember that you don't have to learn all 495 Ontario birds tomorrow, or ever if you don't want to. Do it at a pace at which you keep enjoying birding. My first time birding was during the breeding bird season, so there were a whole ton of species coming in. There was so much bird song, and I ended up crying in my car because I was so overwhelmed by the sounds that by the end of the day, I couldn't remember what a robin sounded like. And I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, I am never going to become a birder. This isn't for me. I can't do it. I'm not smart enough. But I took a couple steps back, started choosing what things I wanted specifically to focus on when it comes to ID and which birds I specifically wanted to focus on. And that helped me get better over time. So yeah, that's kind of what this cute little comic is too. Sometimes you go out and you expect to see a whole ton of birds, but really it's all just the same thing. So getting better with your ID can help you stop chasing everything that happens to be the same bird. So the first important step is to know what habitat you're in. And habitat can really break down the number of birds that you will potentially see there. So for example, you're not going to find a shorebird in a forest. You're probably not going to find a whippoorwill, say, in a southern Ontario wetland. They're very specific birds that live in specific habitats, and that can really help you start with your ID. Time of year is another thing that plays a large role. Migration is a hard time as many birds are passing through. So in May, usually most things are up for grabs from what you can see. However, we can still use this as a general rule. So for example, by the time May hits, most of your winter birds should be gone. So juncos, snow buntings, horned larks, snowy owls, those kinds of birds will have moved on and you won't see them anymore. If you're birding in the summertime, you're most likely not going to see shorebirds as they nest much further north. Of course, that doesn't include killdeers and spotted sandpipers, which are still here. And then at the bottom, we can send this out in an email, but I have a guide to spring arrival dates in Ontario. And it's actually a blog post that was created by Mike Burrell, who's a well-known Ontario birder. And he lists all the species reported in Ontario and the approximate arrival dates of each. And so that's a really an interesting guide to look at in the spring if you want to go out and see certain birds, or if you think you saw something but you're not too sure if it should be here yet. And again, it's great to use the Merlin app like Kenton was talking about, and exploring eBird, which we'll talk about a little later, but they have really great timeframes of when you should see species and in the locations where you are. So those are the two general things that can help you narrow down what species could be around you. And so now we're going to talk about when you actually see something. So first, birding by sight includes properly using binoculars. I brought a pair of our field binoculars here with me. And so it's important that you don't move your head when you use your binoculars. You want to be looking at the bird. Don't lose track of it and move your binoculars in front of your face. So instead of going like this, where you might lose track of where the bird is, you just want to simply bring it right up. And they should be focused right on that bird. When I started, I had a hard time finding the birds I was trying to look for. And that tip really helped. So now getting into the nitty-gritty. Size and shape is a great feature to start taking note of. For example, is it warbler size? Is it robin size? Maybe it's raptor size, so different sizes of birds. Some people find it handy to sketch it out. I had a field technician who would sketch me birds to help her ID, and it was fantastic. And what shape was it? What is it? A large head? Was it a small head? Did it have a long or short neck? Did the neck kind of not exist almost? Was it a plump bottom? Did it sit upright like a heron? And where was it? Was it on a tree? Was it on the ground? And how was it perched? Was it kind of hanging off a tree like a nuthatch would, or was it sitting upright on a branch? So just from getting those clues and even silhouettes, we can kind of say, okay, it was robin-sized, longer legs, not really a defined beak, maybe it was a blackbird. Or perhaps we saw a larger bird with a heavy bottom and long legs, and it was in a wetland. So we could say, okay, that probably was a heron, and go from there. Feet and bill, if you have the opportunity to be close enough and see these things, they can also give you clues as to potentially what family these birds are from, as these are the tools that those families use to move around and to eat. So duckbills, if you see a bird with a really thick bill, you know it's probably eating nuts, and so you could look in the finch family. If you see a bird with a hooked bill, you know that it probably is using that for tearing meat, so you would look in the raptor family. Color and pattern. This is one of the first things that people usually notice about birds is what it looks like. But there's more to it than just color alone. There's patterns, there's spotting, there's wing bars, eye lines. You can get really detailed when it comes to describing birds. And really the more detailed you are, the easier it is to ID it. So I have a couple examples here. I'm trying to bring up a pointer. So in the top right here, we have a red-eyed vireo. So you can describe it as being a dirty, kind of green-colored bird on the upper parts with a lighter white belly. It has this nice white eye line with a black eyebrow above it. And if you get close enough and it is an adult, they will have a red-colored eye, which is a distinctive feature. And then as soon as it makes a sound, you probably know exactly what it is. And down here we have a barred owl. So we could describe this as a brownish white bird with patterning along the belly and back. You could get more descriptive and say that the patterning is a mottled look, which just means it's kind of spotted in a way. The face has rings of color that form a satellite dish shape, which is distinctive for owls. And they have dark black eyes with a small yellow bill, and the bill is hooked, which means it eats meat. So that'll help you kind of narrow it into the owl family, and then once you're looking through your guide, figure out which type of owl it was. In the middle, we have kinglets. So we would say that these are very small birds. In fact, this one right here, the golden crowned kinglet, is just a size up from a hummingbird. And they're named after what you can see on their crowns, tops of their heads. So we would say they're kind of an olivey green color. One of them has a red patch on its head. The other one has a yellow patch with black on either side. And distinctive features for them are these wing bars that are on the sides of their wings. And then last we have a barn swallow. And we can see that it has a white belly, a dark top, which is bluish in some lights. It has the face and neck are a rusty orange color. And if it were flying in the sky, we would also see that it has a forked tail, which is another distinctive feature. So those are just kind of some of the ways to describe colors and pattern. And next is behavior. So behavior can be a really great attribute to take note of when it comes to birding. And in fact, there's a few birds that I base my idea on pretty much solely because of their behavior. So some of the things that you can look at to help you is it alone or is it in a flock? For example, if you're looking at birds in a flock, you know that they're more social birds. So maybe these are more like cedar waxwings or bank swallows, or birds that are more flock-like, social. Than if it's more of a individual bird, like a cardinal, which doesn't tend to be in groups. Was the bird eating? Was it foraging? How was it foraging? A bird perched high on a pole is likely probably going to be a raptor looking for food, whereas if it's on a tree kind of pecking at it, it's probably a woodpecker. And the comic up here is actually a really great comic by Bird and Moon, showing different foraging patterns that I actually do use in real life, where brown creepers creep up a tree. If I see a bird crawling down a tree, it's probably a nuthatch. And then going around making little holes is a sapsucker. Luckily, in the last one, I haven't seen any collisions of them. But those are some really great kind of behavior of how they eat features that you can look at. Another one is, how is it flying? I have a northern harrier in the photo down here, which is a bird I almost always base my ID first on its behavior. To me, when I see it flying, it almost looks like it's flying drunk. It has a few quick wind beats, and then it glides around, and then it beats a couple more times and it glides around. And as soon as I see the patch of white on the rump, I know that that's exactly what it is. It also flies lower instead of most raptors that glide higher. In this photo on the right here, we have a winter wren, and that's another one that wrens tend to hop around on the ground, a low perch. They have a very cocked tail, and it's distinctive of that family that you probably know it's in the wren family. And then, of course, where is it actually? Birds such as thrushes are probably more likely to be lower in the canopy on the grounds and shrubs, whereas certain warblers you're more likely to find really high in the trees. So are you hearing it from above, from below? All these different aspects are clues that can help you. So I'm going to do a quick trial run of birding by sight. This one doesn't have a poll yet, but the later ones will. So I came across this bird and I was wondering what it was. So the first thing I noticed is that it's kind of shorebird looking. It has the large body, smaller head with long legs. It has large eyes, a large bill. The upper part is kind of brown colored. It has a white belly. And then it has these two distinctive black bands across the breast. It was in a rocky area when I took this picture, but just before it had been in a field. And it was running around this field pretending like it had a broken wing, which is very strange for a bird. It's a behavior that I noticed. And when I tried to keep looking at it, it was screaming incessantly at me with its call, aggressively. So if any of you have ever experienced this bird, those clues, especially the behavior, will tell you that that indeed was a killdeer. So next up is birding by ear. So this is likely, for some people, this is one of the hardest parts of birding to learn. It's a lot of memorization, and there isn't as much of a guide that you can look at photos of. So this one takes a lot more time and memory, I guess. But it's really, really important because most of the birds that you will come across, you will only hear. So when I conduct breeding bird surveys in the spring, I'd probably say that only 5% of the birds that I capture on these surveys are by sight, and the rest of them are by sound alone. So we will talk a little bit about that. And for those of you who get this meme, I guess, it's really nerdy, but it's really funny. Every time you hear a bald eagle in a movie or TV show, it's actually using the voice of a red-tailed hawk. So So birding by ear. This goes back to the first story I told you of my first time birding and crying in a car. I tried to listen to everything and heard nothing, so to speak. So practice on focusing on one sound at a time. It's similar to sitting if you've been to an orchestra and trying to pick out one instrument and tune out all the others. It's the same concept and very important. Rhythm. Is it fast and jumbled, or is it slow and leisurely? So for these examples, I do have a winter wren and a robin. So I'm just gonna play those sounds so you can hear what fast and jumbled sounds like. So that is the fast and jumbled winter wren. And then the slow and leisurely American robin. And then pitch. Is it high pitch or is it a deeper pitch, like an owl, say? Did the pitch change during its song? Was it melodic? Was it buzzy sounding? So for this example, I have a veery here, and the pitch changes as it's singing. It starts kind of high, and it's very buzzy sounding.
Veery.
So that was a veery. And then another important thing is repetition. Did the bird sing a phrase once or multiple times? So for my examples here, I have a catbird and a brown thrasher. They sound very similar, but there are differences. So the catbird mimics a bunch of different sounds. So it sounds very distinctive, but then when you hear a brown thrasher, the key difference is the fact that while the catbird says the phrase once, a brown thrasher, which sounds similar, says each thing twice. So each phrase is repeated twice. So there's an example of that. Bird phrases. This is one of my favorite things to learn, because lucky for us, some of these birds have really fun sayings that go along with their sounds that help us remember them. So I'm going to play a couple of these mnemonics for you that go along with this another bird and moon comic. So one of them is up top, the yellow warbler. It says, "Sweet, sweet, I'm so very sweet." So the more times you say it in your head, you can hear it and hear it more. One of the most distinctive ones is the white-throated sparrow, which is in the top right here, that says, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." The, where is the bird? Eastern towhee. So this one right here says, "Drink your tea," and so that's an easy one to hear. And the other one that I have an example of is the ovenbird, which is currently hidden by my face on my screen, but right here that says, "Teacher, teacher, teacher, teacher." And if you've ever been in a forest, you've probably heard the ovenbird. They're very loud. those are just a few examples. There's a bunch more that you can find online, or if you have a bird and you have a phrase that will help you remember it, you can make up your own too. So this is where the polls are starting, Delana.
Okay.
I have 4 photos coming up, and what we're going to do is before I walk through what they are, we're going to have you guys guess what you think they are. So this is the first one.
So I launched the poll and it's probably blocking your view of the bird, but you can drag it to the side.
I can try.
And we'll give about 8 more seconds. Couple more people, if anyone else. All right, that's most people. So I'm gonna end it and share the results.
And 63 people got it correct. It is a black and white warbler. So the head is somewhat flat. It goes streamlined right into the neck. And the wings are long, tail is really short. If I had taken this photo at a different angle. It is about the size of a chickadee, and it has the same colors as a chickadee, but just not the same pattern. So these guys are boldly striped in the black and white stripes. And what I love about certain birds is that they're actually named after what they look like, which really is helpful. So this is the black and white warbler. You'll often see them feeding on trees, around bark similar to nuthatches, but they aren't. And if you ever hear the z, 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 z up in the trees, like this sound, you will have heard one too. So our next one is this poll.
Again, we'll probably allow a couple more seconds. People answering much more quickly this time. All right. Interesting.
So these birds have similar coloring to American goldfinches, and they're around in the winter time, similarly to goldfinches, who are also at your feeders, but it's not a goldfinch. So these are a bird that is a special concern on our endangered species list. They have the yellow bodies. This one over here is the male, and the lighter colored one on the left-hand side is the female. They have a yellow body, kind of dusky gray head, and then this yellow eye line on the male is a very distinctive feature, as is the bottom of the wing being black with a little bit of white just above it. So all these put together, if you're looking through your book, especially with the really thick bill like this one has, it's part of the grosbeak family. So this is the evening grosbeak, which comes down to the Parry Sound area in the wintertime. This time of year, it's up north in the boreal, and this specific bird, the evening grosbeak, is actually a warning sign. A burst of them in population is a warning sign to forest managers of a spruce budworm outbreak. So their populations kind of are in flux with outbreaks of spruce budworm, which is a cool fact. Our next poll and species is this one.
They're getting harder. All right, we're about half of people, a couple more seconds, let everyone else chime in.
Ooh.
All right, let's share what we.
So these birds you will often see flying at dusk, way up in the sky, feeding and feeding and feeding. They have mouths that are shaped like envelopes because they open them up and just swoop in insects all evening long. They have a deep V when they're flying, but the white under their chin and these white wing bars, the little bars on their wings, which you can see at night, are very, very distinctive in knowing that this is a common nighthawk. They are a species of concern. They're threatened here in Ontario. And super, super cool. So yeah, those white patches, they're smaller than a turkey vulture, larger than a whippoorwill. And chimney swifts are much, much, much smaller and have much more rapid flight. And at the same time of night, chimney swifts, turkey vultures will be going to sleep for the evening, and these guys are just coming out. So I also have their sound, since at nighttime something that's all you can hear. It's kind of more of a raspy cat meow sort of sound, which is ironic that I called it a cat meow since these guys actually have whiskers. So our next poll is for this bird, and this is our last one.
Couple more seconds. We're at about 3/4 of people. All right.
Nice. So this is indeed the barred owl, mottled brown, back with white spots, dark brown, almost black eyes, and that yellow hooked bill. If you see a bird in this area, or an owl in this area, it is most likely going to be a barred owl, especially if it is this size. Long-eared owls have little tufts resembling their long-eared name. Burrowing owls are not found in Ontario. Saw-whet owls are much smaller. So yeah, that leaves us with the barred owl. And if you hear it calling, it'll be a "who cooks for you, who cooks for you all" type of sound. So next is our last one is, what if they look the same? There are some birds who look very close to each other. There should be another, there it is, picture. And one of them is ravens and crows. Here we have both. And there's a couple of things you can look at when it comes to the differences. So size is one. Ravens are much larger, crows are smaller. Tail shape, so our crows have a more rounded tail, where our ravens are more diamond shaped. If you're close up, the bill is kind of more thin and long for a crow, whereas a raven is much more thick-billed and has longer whiskery hairs on them. And when you hear them calling, crows caw, whereas ravens kind of have more of a croak sound and are much lower in pitch. So just a few differences that you can see based on different aspects of their patterning and shape. So do we have time for a quick question, if there's questions on this, Tianna, before we move back to Kenton?
Yeah, we actually have one question right now from Carol. She's asking, is it safe to feed yellowfinches Niger seed in the Parry Sound area as to not attract bears? And for anyone not familiar, Niger seed is a very specific type of black seed. It's grown commonly in Ethiopia and India. I'm not sure if it's produced in North America as well, though.
I'm not sure. We're actually going to be talking about that in the next portion.
All right.
So,
next question from Darlene. How do you distinguish a killdeer from a plover?
yes. So killdeer, killdeer is technically could be a type of plover. They're shorebirds. The only plover we would see here would be either the piping plover or the semi-palmated plover. Killdeers are much larger and they have those two bands. Semi-palmated plovers are smaller, same with piping plovers, much smaller. They have a single band and a single band on their forehead too. I describe them as being cuter than a killdeer. And killdeers also, they have that very distinctive behavior, which is almost, I find, aggressive, where they just are constantly battering you with sound and pretending to have broken wings and being very dramatic. Yeah.
Awesome. We had a couple questions pour in as well, so I'd say we have about 6 now. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, can you please put them in the Q&A box? That'll help us see them. So is the barred owl endangered?
No, it's not.
Are there redstarts in the Parry Sound area?
There are redstarts in this area. They are breeding in this area. I have a number by my house. You can find them because they are very black with those little orange patches on them. And they have a multitude of sounds. So when it comes to learning bird sounds for the redstart, you'll have to learn a couple of different ones. They can be a bit of a nemesis bird.
What is going on with the chimney swifts in Parry Sound?
They are here. The hospital in town that was just demolished left up their chimney, which is fantastic, and we hope that the chimney swifts will continue to use it. They are breeding in a number of other chimneys around town. The hospital one specifically is used for migration and not necessarily for breeding. The population overall in Ontario is steadily declining, the same as all other aerial insectivores. But Parry Sound seems to be a very stronghold when it comes to the migration north of and south of the chimney swift. We tend to have, last year I believe we had the highest number of swifts roosting in any chimney in the province,
Wow.
which was really cool.
Show us. Can you list the other common owls that we would see in the biosphere?
Yeah, so we could potentially see saw-whet owls. So they are tiny, they're cuter, and they do kind of like a toot, 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 toot sound. They aren't seen too often, but in the fall and in the spring, you'll most likely hear them doing their little toots. And the other one would be the great horned owl. Up here, these are more likely found around wetlands, and they'll be doing the hoo, hoo. They tend to have little ear tufts too. But by far the most common one would be the barred owl.
All right. I think I'm going to do 3 more questions now quickly, and then we'll save the rest of them for the end. So what are the key differences between a hairy and a downy woodpecker?
The key differences would be size and shapes, I guess. So the hairy woodpecker is much larger in size than the downy woodpecker is. It has a much fatter bottom, I guess you could say. And the size of the bill is another one. Someone once described the difference to me was that if you could imagine, this is horrible, but punching a woodpecker in the face, the bill of the downy wouldn't go past the head, whereas the bill of the hairy would go past. So that's just another way of saying is that the length of the bill is longer than the length of the head. So for the hairy, and the downies is much more smaller and delicate.
Nice. What forest canopy dwelling hawks do we have in the biosphere?
These would be your broadwing hawks. So most hawks that we hear here in the summertime are going to be broadwings.
Okay. And last question, just for now, we'll do more later. How common are snowy owls in Ontario?
Ooh, I see that she had one in her backyard before. That's pretty cool. They are more common, it seems, than they had been, and that just is based off of their populations. As there's more of them in the north breeding, they have to move further south to find space. So right now, a lot of them are staging in the winters throughout Ontario. A lot of them in like the Barrie area in southern Ontario, where there's more farmland for them. We don't have too many in the Parry Sound area. You might see one like near an airport, or if there's large expansive farm field somewhere, but you'll have to go to see them in areas where there's much more larger flat open space in the winter.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we've got a few more slides before we're done with Kenton, and then we'll come back to some more questions right at the end.
Okey-dokey.
Okay, and so what we're going to finish off with here is a little bit of what we can do to help our local birds. And the first thing is just with our everyday choices. And for those that are drinking coffee right now, oh, no, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So, keeping common species common is just really important. And so like the biggest example, or the most common example of this, is that at one time there were passenger pigeons in Ontario and eastern North America, and they the numbers were in the billions. And that when there were flocks that would fly over and they would block the sky for a couple of days. And when the settlers first arrived, they thought there was an inexhaustible resource, and they tasted really good, so they ate them and shot them. They were able to actually wipe them out very, very quickly. So you can get a very common species that can become extinct from human pressures. And so we want to try and, we talk a lot about species at risk, but we also want to make sure that we have to protect those, but we want to try and protect the common species and keeping them common. And so now we'll go to some things that you can do. And for those that are coffee drinkers, buy shade-grown organic coffee. A lot of our birds, or what we consider our birds, actually spend more time not in Canada than they do in Canada. They just are here for breeding, and then they fly south, and they'll end up, a lot of them, in Central America or South America. And in some areas, those forests that they depend on down in their overwintering grounds get converted over for coffee plantations. And there's different types of coffee, and if you can buy shade-grown organic coffee, those kinds of coffee plantations will have a lot more bird life in them than an area that has been totally clear cut and you just have the coffee plants in there. Choosing FSC wood, so Forest Stewardship Council certified wood. The West Wind is the FSC holder in the Parry Sound area, and what that means is the wood has been harvested sustainably, and so there's a schedule of what they cut. It's usually sustainably cut, it's like a sheltered cut where they don't do massive clear cuts. They just kind of go in and cut a few trees here and there, and it's better for all species of wildlife, basically. And then we're using paper products that are 100% post-consumer recycled, and then of course reducing your paper use in general, and other resource use, and reusing and recycling. These are all kind of things that just are lowering our footprint generally, when that can help out with birds. Making your yard bird friendly. And so if you happen to have a yard, making sure that you've got pollinating flowers, and then you've got lots of shrubs to provide cover and berries and lots of different food for them. If it's good for insects, it'll be good for birds because the birds will come in and eat those insects. And so the more natural and domestic, or sorry, the natural wildlife attracting wildflowers and shrubs, the better. But there are definitely some domestic ones that are great for pollinators too, that you can plant. Bird feeders. So there was a question before about bird feeders. So I don't use a bird feeder at all in the time when bears are active. So in Parry Sound area, we've got lots of bears, and I'd rather not have one come into my house again. So we don't use our bird feeders at all in late May until the end of October. Hummingbird feeders, if you can get one set up in a way that a bear is not going to get at it, or a raccoon is not going to get at it, that can be okay. But generally, I try not to attract bears in. You want to keep them clean. Hummingbird feeders, you want to clean them out every couple days, because that sugar water in the sun, it can get moldy, and then the birds come along and they drink it and they can get sick and die from it. So the same thing within the winter when you're using, let's say, sunflower seeds. You attract a lot of birds into an area, and they're scratching around in your bird feeder, depending on the type of bird feeder that you have and all the seeds that fall to the ground. And so it's a good idea to clean that up every few days, really, because otherwise diseases can go through those and because you're concentrating the birds at your feeder. And there's different types of bird feeders. We already mentioned about Niger, which is really good for goldfinches. Black sunflower seeds is really kind of common for a lot of different species. Suet is really good for your woodpeckers. So depending on what kind of bird you want to attract, you can focus on a different type of bird feed. Or if you want them all, get a whole range of different bird feeders. And next up is windows. Yeah, so this is a very common problem is windows and collisions. And there's really two different times. During migration, a lot of them are caused by the light reflecting or lights off of, especially like high rises in Toronto, attracting migrating birds. They get confused and then they fly into the windows or fly into the buildings, and they fall down to the sidewalk. And so this FLAP Canada is the Fatal Light Awareness Project that was working to try and protect birds. And so they work with a lot of those skyscrapers trying to get their lights down in the winter time, or sorry, in the migration time. But the other thing to do is to like the visitor center that I'm in, or your house even, the reflections of your window can fool a bird, and they think that they're can fly through your window because they see the reflection of the cedar tree that's right in front of me here. And so a lot of people use these little bird silhouettes. They don't really work, unfortunately, though. So what you want to do is the top right picture has these little panels on them. And what they do is they break up, they're stickers essentially, and they kind of break up the reflection, and the bird realizes, oh, that's not something that I can fly through. And there's different sources of these kind of stickers. Some of them are lines. I've seen people that have painted like with a tempera paint, a line every couple inches, and on their window during the summertime when they have a lot of birds around, to try and reduce the number of birds that fly into their windows. After that, we've got, of course, our pets. And so dogs and cats. And dogs are not talked about as much as cats, but dogs, if they're not on leash and they're bounding all through the woods, they can scare up some of your ground nesters, like grouse or your thrushes, perhaps, and then disturb nests like that. And then the The window painting is also a great kids activity, Delaney just said too, so that's great. And then cats. So cats, they definitely are the bigger problem, I would say. They kill tons and tons of birds. Up to 350 million birds every year are killed by cats. So if you have a cat, make sure it's an indoor cat, or if it goes outside, that you've got it on a leash, because cats that are outside unattended will definitely be attacking birds and killing birds, and they have contributed to the extinction of 34 species of birds worldwide. So cats, I love them, but they really, it's best for them to be inside. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is something that you can do when you get into birding is you can actually help with the observations that you make. You can help collect data, which is useful for citizen science. And so there's lots of different projects. eBird is one, iNaturalist is another. And the sightings that you make with iNaturalist, you really need to have a good photograph or a good voice recording of the bird to be able to register under iNaturalist. But if you do manage to get a good photo, and then you can submit it to iNaturalist, and that data can be checked by experts to confirm that you got the right species, and then that data will it just populates a whole the map of Ontario with like when and where this particular species is found. The eBird thing is more if you go out birding and you say this morning you've heard or saw 20 birds on your morning walk. You can write down all of those different species and the location and submit that to eBird, and that's will also be used for researchers that can say, whoa, I wonder where they found even grosbeaks this winter. They can look up that kind of information on eBird. The Parry Sound Nature Club has been involved with the Christmas bird counts, and we do chimney swift watches also. And then, of course, the Biosphere Reserve has a list also that's under iNaturalist. So if you sign up for iNaturalist and then you look for the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve, you can sign up for that too. And so any bird that sighting that you have under iNaturalist that's in the Biosphere Reserve will then get populated into that too. And so I can see there's been 2,000 observations, 810 species. This is not just birds specifically, this would be reptiles and plants and insects also by 75 different people from the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve. So that brings us to an end. It's just after 12 o'clock, and I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to Lena and Tianna.
Thanks, Kenton. That was awesome. So respecting that it is a couple minutes after 12, we might start to lose a few people. So thank you so much for joining us today. However, we do have some pretty good questions coming in if you want to stay in for those. Also, a quick shout out to the Gardens of Parry Sound who are broadcasting this webinar collectively. I think everyone's watching it in the common space. So hello, Gardens of Parry Sound and everyone there. All right, let's get into these questions. A great question from Robin. Why are nighthawks endangered?
Nighthawks are a type of, just making sure, yeah, okay, I'm unmuted. Nighthawks are a type of aerial insectivore. So they're facing a similar trend as all our aerial insectivores are with population declines, which is most likely due to a decrease in insects, so decrease in food availability.
Yeah. Debbie's asking, what are the differences between sandhill cranes versus great blue herons nesting behavior? Are there differences too between the appearances of the chicks?
Ooh. Have you seen cranes nesting, Kenton? I believe they're ground nesters. Whereas great blue herons nest in trees.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so if you were to come up to a wetland and see a bunch of these massive nests in dead trees, those will most likely be your great blue herons, which is also called a rookery, heronry. And then they also nest communally, whereas sandhill cranes are more individual nesters and nesting on the ground. The babies, I've never seen nestlings of them, but I know they look pretty prehistoric.
Probably still cute though.
Of course.
Carrie would like to know, do you know if cardinals are moving further north? She's occasionally seen a female out on the bay.
I wouldn't say they are. We're kind of a little north of their range, and I've seen ones. You'll see the odd one here and there, but I wouldn't say they're flocking to the area.
Museum of Tower Hill has kind of a resident population of cardinals, but I live in Nobel, and we don't really have them there. They seem to be just kind of on the edge. Yeah.
Mm.
Vicky's wondering if the bird seed gets wet and clumpy, will the birds stop eating it?
I would say that you should stop the birds from eating it. As soon as your bird seed gets wet, it's going to start to create an environment that fosters bacteria that will make your birds sick. So I would remove all the bird seed and clean your bird feeder, dry it out, and then fill it back up.
Awesome. Oh, there was a really good question. Why are there no purple martins anymore?
That'd be another one of those aerial insectivores that has just crashed, and because they're just not the flying insects there used to be, would be the main reason, I think.
Yeah, I think with them too being cavity nesters, perhaps they're not finding as much habitat as they once had, even though they're still tree swallows, which use the little nest boxes, but purple martins, which are colonial birds, tend to need slightly different nesting habitat, and with no insects and not bad, they're crashing a little harder.
So a question from Tara, wondering what your favorite bird calls are. I like that.
I like that too.
The Veery.
I love the winter wrens. They're my absolute favorite, but I have a special place in my heart for chickadees just because their calls are a language. And so I like listening to their chickadee-dee-dees and trying to figure out what they're mad at. So.
So an interesting question here, I haven't heard of this, from Monica. What do you think about grape jelly for Orioles? Not nutritious, definitely not, but they like it. Unfortunately, so did squirrels. I haven't heard of feeding jelly to birds.
No, I haven't either.
I have. I would say not, because it's a lot of sugar, and birds do not need that additive sugar. I would just put out like your oranges, your more natural foods.
Yeah. Yeah. You're also going to probably have a really sticky mess. So just a clarification from Monica. So I guess yes, the jelly is sugar. She's asking about hummingbird food, sugar water versus the other sugar. I guess that would be specific to the hummingbird itself, though.
Yeah, so you can buy like commercially made hummingbird food. We suggest not using the one with the red dye. It does not have to be red for them to drink it, and it's not as healthy for them. It's simply just using your plain white sugar. It's 1 part white sugar and 3 parts water that you bring to a boil, let it cool, and then fill your bird feeder with it.
And can you speak to birds needing sugar when they arrive here from migration?
They definitely would like a energy boost. The earlier you put out your hummingbird feeders when they arrive, will give them a little bit of an advantage, as they won't need to find alternative sources of food when flowers aren't blooming yet. They will feed off of tree sap in the holes made by yellow-bellied sapsuckers, and I'm assuming probably other woodpeckers too, but it definitely gives them kind of that boost at a time of year when it could be helpful.
So Tara has a question about bats. I think we'll come back to that. We'll save that one for the end. We'll just stick to the birds right now. Sarah's wondering if there are any bird banding projects in the biosphere region.
Not at this time. There is, well, that's a lie. If you were to go on Facebook and look up the Simcoe County Raptor Banding Group, there is a team who I go out with every once in a while to volunteer, who is banding broadwing hawks as part of a large broadwing hawk research network. So if you are driving along the roads and you see a broadwing hawk that has a band on it on a wire, take a close look and get those numbers, and they would love to have that information for resightings of them.
Cool. All right, so 2 more questions and then we'll do the bat one. I think that'll be everything. So any suggestions for specific types of berry bushes that are native and popular with birds? Oh, it says in Southern Ontario or Toronto, but maybe up here too. Some recommendations?
The birds in my yard are all for pin cherries, nanny berries, service berries.
Any
They've
kind of
demolished all my blueberries. Basically any sort of berry. I would go onto the Biosphere GBBR website, and we have a great guide of native plants that includes shrubs. A lot of these are also found in like Toronto, Southern Ontario. So maybe we can include that link for people in our email.
Yes, let's do that. I will say that we have a high bush cranberry outside our office, and it's beautiful, and nothing seems to eat them. I think it's like a last resort food. I'm not sure, but birds also really go for elderberries. It's hard pressed to get to the elderberries before the birds, actually. And our last bird question is, why do hummingbirds like? It says canna lilies. I wonder if it is maybe supposed to be calla lilies. They're kind of a tube-shaped lily. I don't know if you guys know that about that.
No, I don't.
No.
It might just be the shape of them. I know I have calla lilies in my yard, but I also have things like nasturtiums, and the hummingbirds seem to appreciate something that is comparable to the shape of their beaks, so it could be something like that.
Yeah, in my yard we have our hummingbirds going to our nasturtiums, our bee balms, and a couple of our other flowers that have the kind of long tubular look.
Yeah. So just back to that's the birds, and then we had a question about bats. Are they coming back? Do you want to comment on that? It's okay to say no.
It's hard to know. It's very hard to know.
Yeah, there definitely was a major crash in the little brown bats and the big brown bats, but there does seem to have been there are some those bats in particular are very social and colonial, and there seem to be in a few areas the survivors have found each other, and so there are a few places where you can go and you can still see 70 bats emerging out of one bat colony. At my mother's house, in fact, is one of these. Not to her happiness, but to mine. So there are survivors, and but this is a long game because they are such a slow reproducer. It takes each bat only has one. Each female bat only has one a year, so it's going to take years for them to rebound.
And two other comments on that too. This is the time of year that the young of the year start to fly around. So you might see a little uptake. It doesn't necessarily mimic a population explosion or anything like that, but it's just that the babies are finding their own way in life. This year is also a boom year for gypsy moths, and I'm not sure, it's very possible bats as aerial insectivores could be benefiting from that. I'm not sure if gypsy moths are really active at night, but
Yeah.
it could be a possibility
Yeah.
anyway. It's a boom year for most caterpillars.
Yes.
Yeah,
it seems
The fall webworm is coming on very strong right now.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Randy's recommending Awenda Provincial Park Discovery Program has been doing bat counts this summer, so there might be more information from Awenda.
Okay.
Thanks, Randy. All right, so that is everything for the webinar. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in today, and look in your email for the follow-up, our list of references and everything. And yes, thank you. I hope you'll consider joining us again. We have one more webinar in our summer series, and it's about the infamous muskie. I wanted to make a joke. I don't know if you can see both my hands, but the webinar will be this big. Actually only going to be an hour, so yeah, anyway, we hope to see you then, and thanks again to our presenters, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.